really looking forward to those coaching sessions that we're going to be doing, coming up in the next couple of months. So look forward to talking to you all individually and helping you all with your programs. I'm going to turn my camera off here during the presentation. We gave a presentation yesterday for another group, and I lost my connection in the middle of it. So when I turned my camera off, it seemed to help. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I will turn it back on when we get to the Q&A section at the end. Okay, so like Steve said, we're here to do this one final webinar on with our foundational learning series on building capacity for SNAP ENT. So go ahead and switch to the next slide, Jose. So this is an agenda, things we're going to be talking about today. We're going to do a quick recap, a review of some of the things we've covered in previous webinars. Just a couple of things we want to, remind you about. And then talk about, why we do reporting under SNAP ENT, and that's part of the capacity building is building up what you're doing as far as reporting for SNAP ENT services. And then also the capacity that you would be needing for verifying SNAP ENT eligibility and participation. And then also looking at the funding piece of it, what kind of capacity building you would need to do around that as far as compliance and building up your infrastructure for doing the invoicing that's needed for SNAP ENT on a regular basis. And then some other things you want to think about as far as building your capacity for community colleges, technical colleges. Susan's going to be talking about some best practices that we've seen. And then also we have some treats for you today as far as some guest speakers that are going to be talking about putting some of this capacity building in practice at their colleges. We have a couple guests from Kentucky as well as from Washington State. So we'll be introducing them a little bit later on in the presentation. And then of course we'll save time at the end to do some Q&A. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, just a quick SNAP ENT review to kind of remind you what we've been over before. And again, I think you're going to see some overlap between those things and what we're talking about today as far as capacity building. Next slide. So when we talked about last time, we talked about assessing your funding for SNAP ENT. And again, just as a reminder, when you're reviewing what kind of revenue you have coming into your organization, again, you want to check to see, make sure that you're looking at non-federal funding that you're receiving, as well as making sure that it's not matched to another federal program that you're drawing down a reimbursement from or doing a match. And then, tying those expenses and services that you provide, seeing how they line up with your with the SNAP ENT activities that are allowable under this program. So, again, looking at that as well as, tying that to the participants that you serve, folks that are, either have little or no income and are either eligible receiving SNAP benefits or potentially eligible for SNAP. So again, all that lines up to help you kind of assess your funding and making sure that you can draw down as much as you can from the SNAP ENT program. Next slide. So again, just to review, what is a third-party partnership? Again, it's an organization like yourselves, a community college or a community-based organization that is contracted with the SNAP agency in the state, and that can be either directly with the state, who's primarily responsible for the program, or it could be a county who's running a program in a state that is county administered and state supervised. So you have that contract and you are providing those services directly for the program. And then, as a third party, again, the college is providing some vital programs for ENT services. Another name for this is, of course, a third party reimbursement program or a 50-50 partnership. And then once you provide those services, then you are submitting, like you said, the invoice, which allows you to get reimbursed up to 50% of federal funding for those services, and then you can then reinvest that funding into the program to help it grow. Next slide. So looking at the different elements of third-party partnership, again, we've been through three of the four elements: the participants that you serve, the services that you have in your program, and how they line up with SNAP E&T, as well as the funding that we just talked about. So again, we're talking about capacity building and the things that you would need to think about when doing that. Next slide. So what do we mean by capacity? Well, we look to the SNAP E&T Operations Handbook that the USDA has put out in the last couple of years, and they define the capacity of a third-party partner as having, financial stability. In other words, having funding that you can depend on throughout the program year, making sure that you have that non-federal funding that you can use to pay for your services up front and be eligible for receiving that 50% reimbursement. And if you've had, federal or state contracts in the past, if you have good capacity, if you have a good record of, maintaining those contracts and abiding by those contracts. And even if you haven't had federal or state contracts, any contracts that you've had before, you've been able to meet, all those requirements that were in those contracts. So again, those are things that kind of point to and help define, what capacity you have and what capacity you would need to be a third-party partner under SNAP E&T. Next slide. So how should you be thinking about capacity at this point? And what we mean by that, of course, is if you're not a third-party provider yet for SNAP E&T, or you're brand new to the program, really the things you need to think about at the beginning is just basically just understand the expectations that you have as an E&T partner. So understanding and working with your SNAP agency to find out and make sure that you understand what those expectations are. And then make sure that your staff have the right knowledge so that you can administer this program within your organization. Make sure you make the right connections, look at what tasks might be needed for your folks, and make sure those tasks are assigned to the appropriate person. And then think about how SNAP E&T, is really capacity building in its nature. In other words, once you receive those 50% reimbursement fundings, you can, like I said before, reinvest that into the program and help your program grow. And then those reinvested funds can then be recycled, and you can draw down reimbursement on those again. So they go even further when you think about it that way. Things you probably don't want to be thinking about is at the beginning, especially, is hiring new staff to solely focus on E&T. It's really not needed. Again, we want you to really integrate the things that are needed for SNAP E&T and integrate it into what you're already doing, and not have to hire new staff to do those functions. You can spread those out amongst the staff you currently have. Especially for colleges, don't be creating new programs or curriculum just for SNAP E&T students. There's no need to do that. Again, we know that community colleges have programs that line up well with SNAP E&T and really a good fit for that. So there's no need to create a new program just for SNAP E&T. And probably another thing I want to add to this too is not expect to have, a lot of referrals come to you at the very beginning. It's a process that needs to be worked out, how the referrals come. I think most of your participants in SNAP E&T are probably going to be coming from folks that come into your door first. In other words, folks that sign up to come to college and again are meeting the conditions for being a participant in SNAP E&T. So those are what we call reverse referrals, and those will come in that way a lot better. Next slide. So I think it's I'm going to pause here, and I think it's good time to hear from our guest speakers and talk about the capacity building in practice and how it works on the ground at a college. So we have some people here from Kentucky at Jefferson Community Technical Colleges, Shauna King Sims, Richard Davis, and Joanna Lynch. I'm not sure who wants to go first, but I think Shauna, you're going to start it off.
Well, I just want to hand it off to Joanna Lynch and our Jefferson team. I am at the Community and Technical College System Office, and all of the work with students and SNAP E&T clients happens at the college, in this case, Jefferson. So Joanna, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I will apologize in advance for my Alabama drawl. This is not Kentucky, don't blame them. So, but basically was just asked to kind of go through a little bit of our history and sort of what happened at Jefferson. And maybe you can learn from us. And I appreciate the folks at the Seattle Jobs Initiative who stayed on the phone with me in the very beginning as I was asking 1,000 questions. But I think this process started for us in about 2016. Our state DCBS contacted Shauna at the system office, and Jefferson was, I think, the only college to sort of bite. My role at the college is I'm the director of grants and contracts. And so, so we're definitely open and used to contractual agreements and working with the feds and federal funds. So it's not unusual. And the state of Kentucky had not had a SNAP E&T program maybe ever, or 10 years or something. So it was new for our state folks as well, relatively. And we spent a lot of time in meetings talking with the state office about, you know, how this would work. And I had 1,000 questions, and I think that was good. And then we got to the implementation piece. And so that's, I think, where the sweet spot is, probably what you would like to hear about, and maybe even like, don't be me, right? So, and in the very beginning in the SNAP E&T program, we were to serve ABODs. I had to figure out what an ABOD was. And once we figured that out, again, our college is in metropolitan Louisville, and we were primarily looking at Jefferson County, which is where the largest basically population in the state of Kentucky is. And so there are lots of ABODs in the system. And so, you know, our eyes kind of lit up like, oh my gosh, we could, you know, try to pull these folks into the college and also, you know, be able to actually impact them in their future in terms of their employment, which is what this is all about, right? And so we went through several things. One of the things, we are a multi-campus in multiple counties, and we had to kind of talk through that question. How do we do this and implement it in one county and not in another? I won't, you know, dwell on that, but that was certainly a consideration and a challenge. And then we also had some challenges about how does this fit into our grant accounting system? This is a 50% reimbursement rate. So how do you bill the state in our system for the full amount, but actually, you know, you're getting a 50% reimbursement rate on that. The one thing that's true in Kentucky, I don't know if this is true for everyone. I just know that in our state, that on the personnel side, we could charge our full indirect cost rate, which is relatively high. It's 54.12% on salary only. So when you think about that, it means that your reimbursement rate, at least for salary, is a tad bit higher when you reinvest that indirect cost revenue into your program. So that's kind of a selling point for your CFO and for your president as well. And so the sweet spot for the college is that we would be able to, or our expectation would be that we'd be able to draw folks who would maybe not even think of themselves as college going folks, and then be able to compel them, or even new people, to recruit into the college and provide the support that they needed through this grant funding. Basically a coach, a case manager type that actually is kind of gonna shepherd them through the entire system and even their time at the college. So that was sort of our expectation. We had a huge budget because we had huge numbers of potential. And I think our first few budgets were probably $500,000. Ha ha ha. So anyway, if I knew then what I know now, we know we're not going to spend $500,000, but I did not know what to expect. And so we sort of put that as a placeholder. and thought we would pull some funding from different folks at the college, assign a person from financial aid, for example, and be able to offset some of the costs to have them actually assigned to the SNAP program, in addition to a person that would actually be the case manager and deal with folks and recruit folks one-on-one. So one of the big things that we talked about was, could we get a list, a contact list from our state office, and sort of try that out. That was a little bit challenging just because of their software system, but we did end up with about 60 names. And we learned a lot from that experience, which was, again, these are ABODs. And so they had to participate in some way in order to be to continue their SNAP benefits. And so what we found is that that's not a compelling reason necessarily for a person to come and enroll at the college. Not really surprising when you think about it. And so there's a subset of those folks that this would be a great opportunity. It's like that they might not have any other way, but those were definitely the minority in that group of 60. The other thing that we found is, addresses were bad, contacting people was almost impossible, response rate was terrible. And so we found out pretty early on that was not going to be the way to go. Even if we had a huge list, it's not really a recruiting list like we had hoped that it would be. And so live and learn. And then the other thing that we found, if I kind of fast forward for maybe 6 months or so, as we started getting ready to actually implement the program full force, by this time the state, originally, I guess we thought we were going to be the only SNAP ENT sort of provider in our area. And what we realized is the state, and rightfully so, are actually recruiting other agencies to be providers. And most of those providers in our area are those folks who are doing very short-term training, 8 weeks, and their goal is to get somebody into a job. And as you can see, or not as you can see, but as you can imagine, for the community college, the sweet spot for us is that we're able to draw somebody in that's a tuition paying student, and that we can actually support them better. They may have more needs than a regular student because we are able to offset the cost of this case manager that sort of moms and dads them through the college, and can put them in the right places for support systems than they would have any other way. So that was our idea, and I think it's still a great idea, and it's basically what we do now. Richard Davis is the person who actually does that for the college. But first we had to learn all of the, the rules that the state had, and how are we supposed to keep the, files and those, kinds of rules that we would not, they're very deep and wide for SNAP ENT. So we needed to know and develop a process internally of how we would keep up with all of that. And so we did, but it took a little while. By the time we were ready to actually put all of this boots on the ground, there were several other agencies that, again, were really, their focus is short-term training. And so they, I suspect, get the vast majority of the referrals of ABODs, or even later on, we ended up with a voluntary, the state allowed folks who were SNAP recipients, not SNAP ENT, to also volunteer to be part of our SNAP ENT program, which we also thought would be a large influx of people, but didn't really turn out to be so much. One of the big benefits for the college has been we are able to refer our students to SNAP. So that if we do find a student that from our food bank, or some of our faculty might, send somebody our way that we realize could really use the SNAP benefits, we do reverse refer folks on a regular basis. But what we found, for the most part, the referrals that we receive, which is actually another contract that the state has for, sort of managing those referrals to all of the providers, is that a lot of the folks that we get referred to us are really not college. They really can't do college level work. And so then we have to refer them back to adult education, so that potentially they could either get their GED, or that they could improve their skill set so that they could, again, be on this pathway to be a college student. We are not the adult ed provider in the largest county, but we are the adult ed provider in the 8 counties around us. And so that does facilitate this referral back to adult education because they're still involved with a college. So that's really what we found. And as a result, we don't have a lot of students. I think I even asked Richard yesterday how many students we had, and I think it's potentially about 10 at the moment. So that's not a lot. You know, we're a college that has about 10 or 11,000 students. And so, but every student counts. So even the 10 that we have, we try to, not we try, but Richard treats them very well and shepherds them through this process. And we do provide those wraparound services. Again, that's sort of his role, and he excels at that. And I think it does make a difference between those students succeeding because they know they've got one spot to go to and to be able to get that support system. So that's kind of our story. Our budget now is, I'm thinking it's maybe $50,000. We don't even spend that. I think the other admonition that I would give to you is to make sure that your president or your CFO is willing to budget whatever that other 50% is, and that they're on board with that. And maybe someday we'll get a lot of an influx of students in our SNAP ENT program, but right now we just, you know, this is about normal for us. So would you like to say something, Shauna?
Thank you. Joanne did a terrific job. The only thing I would add is that you know, I often hear folks who are providing technical assistance for ENT talk about, well, it's all about the reverse referrals. However, and yes, there are certainly advantages for students to be reverse referred and tap into SNAP resources. But, you know, the real win-win for the college would be to bring onto campus a new tuition paying student that was not already on board with the college. Having said that, Richard, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
I mean, I think Joanna did an amazing job covering everything we do here. You know, Gina and I definitely, and I kind of want to give spotlight to Gina too, because she does a lot of this advising with the students. And so basically when we have either a reverse referral or, you know, a referral from the cabinet or for community partner, we always meet with the student, identify with those. Usually it's non-academic barriers first that we're focused on to try to see how we can lead them into education. And I feel like we have a good team here that's able to do that and add a lot of support. So really proud of what we're doing here, and would like to see more referrals, but really proud of what we're doing and the team we have together for it.
Well, thank you very much for that insight into, you know, starting out the program and the things you need to think about as far as, you know, building your capacity. Appreciate your time in this. Anybody have any questions for the team from Jefferson or for Shauna?
We have a question from the chat also.
Oh, okay.
Your mic's
Yeah,
on.
okay, sorry. So yes, it basically comes out of the college's general fund. So it's non-federal and it's the general fund. And I think, again, one of the selling points, and we don't spend a whole lot of money, so it's not like I'm really asking for the moon. I do think my president does understand the potential, and so that's good. But it does help that we are able to charge that indirect cost rate on the personnel side. And so it really means that it doesn't cost us 50% if we reinvest that. It costs us a little bit less than that. And
Right.
So that's helpful.
And
That's a good point.
what Jefferson's doing is basically charging small percentages of staff time that they are committing and dedicating to the ENT effort.
Right. Good. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Again, we'll have time at the end if you think of something later. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jose. So again, when we're thinking about capacity, there's a couple of things we want to kind of emphasize. And one of them is the data and the reporting aspect of SNAP ENT. Again, you know, like like we explained that because you're serving SNAP ENT students and this funding comes from the federal government, there is expectation that there's going to be some data collection and reporting, through the SNAP agency and up to the USDA Food Nutrition Service. So some of the things that they want to know about is making sure that individuals are assessed properly and have employment plans, that folks are tracked and their progress is tracked, and making sure that they are going through the programs successfully and getting all the help they need to do that. And then whatever component they're enrolled in, making sure that that is tracked properly, and the start dates and the end dates for those different components, and also any outcomes that they might have, as far as completing them successfully, whether they are referred and are able to find a job based on that training. Those are all things that are good to capture in the data and the reporting. Next slide. So like I explained, again, this requirement is coming from USDA down to the SNAP agency, whether that, again, it normally will come through the state first. And then if it's a county administered state, then that would be passed down to the county. And then the reporting requirement then is passed on to the third party provider in making sure that they are, tracking these things and reporting that back up through the same channels. Again, USDA has to have this information so they can justify the funding that they get through for the SNAP ENT program. Again, the SNAP agency within the state has to do the same and make sure they continue to get the funding that they need to run the program and help the folks that are receiving SNAP benefits. Next slide. So just a sample of some things you might be tracking using with SNAP ENT. And one of those things is making sure that you're verifying eligibility for SNAP ENT and making sure that individual is receiving SNAP benefits during the month that they are getting a service from SNAP. So this is just a sample roster exchange that could happen between your agency and the SNAP agency. Tracking the individual's name and whether or not you've confirmed that they are on SNAP. Sometimes it's good to have and know when they've been certified for SNAP, so that you can kind of help them keep track of making sure they stay on SNAP benefits, so you can again continue to claim the expenses that you're investing into your programs and providing services for these folks. Next slide. The other part of that is the administrative and fiscal part. In other words, how you're tracking the funding that you're receiving and investing into the program. Making sure that you're documenting any support service that you provide for folks, things like transportation assistance, any clothing, or even help with tuition in the college can be considered a support service. And then making sure that you're managing those federal funds correctly and by the rules, and tracking which funds you're using to draw down the federal funds, and making sure there's a good tracking to what those funds are and the fact that you're using them for SNAP ENT allowable services. And then making sure you're keeping any documentation and things you need for any auditing or contract monitoring that you would receive from the SNAP agency. And of course, to have a sound budget, a budget that makes sense, and one that that tracks directly to the invoicing that you're doing for the program once you actually provide those services and are asking for that reimbursement. Next slide. So just kind of an idea of what you might look at as far as assigning roles to different folks that work for you. Again, these are a list of some staff elements that you might think are going to be involved in your SNAP ENT program. Your student enrollment folks, any career navigators that you have or student advisors. Then, of course, all important, your financial aid staff, and because usually they have the first connection with folks who are looking for any financial aid to help them pay for college that they're going through. So, and again, SNAP E&T is one of those things that can help them, get enrolled and participate in your programs. The things that are kind of tied to that are your student assessment, your employment plan, any participation they have in a component is going to, like I said before, needs to be tracked. So who's going to be doing that? And then it's tracking those supportive services that they might receive, and then making sure that somebody is tracking their progress and documenting that progress in any case notes, either in your systems or usually the SNAP agency will have a system, an eligibility, a case management system that will that you'll need to put notes into to track people's progress in your programs. Next slide. So things to think about as far as being prepared for an audit or a contract monitoring, and basically there's two aspects to this. There's a program side and then a fiscal side. Under the program side, you're looking at the individual participation and how the case files that you're keeping for that individual. As far as making sure that you've done matches to see if that person is eligible or not for SNAP E&T, making sure that they have the materials in their files, things like release forms, so that you can share information back and forth between you and the SNAP agency, and making sure that they have the proper assessments done, employment plans, and then any civil rights notices that need to be told about. Of course, logging those, logging those support services are an important part of this that is going to be checked during a contract monitoring, and then records of making sure that you're checking again for their eligibility and receipt of SNAP benefits, so that you can claim the services that they're receiving under your programs. Then the fiscal side could be looking at making sure that you have those non-federal dollars that are backing up what you're claiming as far as expenses for the program. Making sure that when you are claiming expenses, that you say that they're reasonable and necessary for that individual to participate in the college program and to be successful in that program. Keeping receipts are all important, things that'll be checked during contract monitoring or an audit. And then making sure you have a roster of the participants that you're serving, that you're invoicing for during a certain billing period. Then, of course, if you're using methodology for allocating your expenses, again, most of your programs are not going to be strictly for SNAP E&T. There's going to be a certain percentage that are SNAP E&T. So you'll have to have some sort of method of allocating expenses based on that percentage. So again, it's not a complete list of the compliance points that would be checked, but again, it's just a thing the main takeaway here is that there's going to be multiple staff within your college are going to be involved in this. So it's important to make sure that they know about SNAP E&T, they're educated, they have the knowledge about it, so they can keep proper records that help you during an audit or contract monitoring. Next slide. And this is just a sample of what an invoice might look like that you would be submitting on a regular basis. Again, these line items would need to be matched up with your budget. You may not have expenses in all these line items each and every month, but it's always good to list them on here so you don't forget to make claim for the expenses of service that you're providing for your SNAP E&T participants. And again, like the team from Kentucky mentioned, your indirect rate is very important to make sure you claim that if you have it. And we talked about this during the funding part webinar a couple weeks ago. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and she's going to talk to you about some best practices for your staffing and task assignments. Susan?
Thanks, Bob. So yeah, Bob sort of laid out all the different elements of, where you need to think about building capacity or just understanding what your capacity is when you're implementing SNAP E&T. We also heard from Jefferson Community College, where they sort of, set out kind of thinking really large scale and have sort of had to right size based on the referrals that they're receiving and sort of what things look like right now for their student population. So, regardless of the scale that you're potentially going to be able to operate on, when you're thinking about where you're assigning roles and how this work is going to get done, there's just some things that you want to consider. So, we mentioned looking into, who's doing what currently and where SNAP E&T work could sort of fit naturally and assign those tasks accordingly to, especially, when you're first starting, so you're not thinking about adding new staff, but, how can you sort of repurpose existing staff and the roles that they do and put that work, incorporate that work into what they're already doing, where there's room for them to do that is going to be really important. As you do this, make sure that you're writing your processes down and identifying kind of on paper who's doing what is going to be really important. So you have continuity over time if you have turnover, and just also for folks to really be able to reference, especially if you're operating on a smaller scale at first. It's not going to be as, embedded in the work you're doing if it's only a handful of students. So you really want to make sure that everybody has the process written down so they know what to do each month and as the tasks come up. Next slide, please. And then, we've talked about this before, and here's just another way that we'll highlight that it's really important to collaborate with your SNAP E&T agency. If they have a handbook, not everybody does at this stage in their program, but when there are written policies and guidance, be referring to that. It's often going to be an addendum to your contract anyway, if the handbook exists, and they'll update the handbook as policies and procedures change. But make sure that you're asking clarifying questions from the handbook. Make sure you understand what the reporting requirements are, what their expectations are. If you're going to be operating under an intermediary, which our next guest speaker might be able to talk about, from Washington. Washington operates, all their colleges operate under an intermediary. They might also have guidelines written down and policies that are specific to how things need to function based on that arrangement. Establishing a point of contact, like one person who you can go to answer questions, and also give feedback for how their policies and guidelines are really playing out is really important, especially if you're in a state where the program is still kind of emerging. Hearing the feedback from providers, especially if colleges haven't been offering SNAP E&T services, really letting them know how their policies and procedures really play out in your setting is helpful for them. And having that collaborative back and forth can really make the program stronger and make sure it's working for you as a partner is going to be really important. And, to that point, your SNAP agency or your intermediary will likely have, regular check-in points and meetings for you to be attending. Make sure you're participating in those. If they aren't occurring with the frequency that's working for you, go ahead and try to initiate that contact, because it can be really helpful to just have that communication back and forth, and make sure that you know what they expect and that you're meeting those expectations is really important. Oh, I was going to say next slide. Thank you. it's also really important to make sure your leadership understands the program and the benefits the program can have and what's just what's happening. And so, I think this point was made by Jefferson as well. Make sure that leadership has a shared understanding and vision for how you're implementing SNAP E&T, how it can benefit your college, where there's opportunities to grow and scale over time. This really is a program that works, and we see it usually happen where you start small and then you can kind of build as you go. And sometimes things happen that are unforeseen. I think we all have learned from the last couple of years that things don't always go as planned, but still, being able to kind of track and project over time what your growth might look like. You really want to make sure that management and leadership understand what that looks like and help you plan for that. And then, leadership really needs to be able to kind of keep an eye on how things are operating, sort of on the front line. And so they can really help, make sure that you're operating under, expectations and following policies and procedures. So sometimes that does mean that frontline staff are kind of bringing that back up to managers or just, whoever's really involved in directly operating the program. Make sure that your leadership is kind of kept in the loop and that they're playing an active role in how the program operates. Super important. Next slide, please. And so, back to frontline staff, student-facing staff, you really want to make sure that they're effectively trained. They know what if they're adding certain tasks and things into the work they're doing, and even just questions that they might need to be asking students and how they're following up with students, make sure that they understand why that's important. And sometimes it's just simply for compliance, but often it's really to be doing the work of SNAP E&T effectively. So while we talk about SNAP E&T being kind of a funding stream that does sort of sit in you can think about it as a capacity building mechanism and a funding mechanism, make sure that your frontline staff know what the sort of programmatic and service aspects are, not only for compliance, but also to understand what the opportunity might be that in order to offer support services when they're needed, and help, make sure they understand what might be available to help them, to help the students that they're working with succeed. And, I can't say this enough, just write processes down, document things. Don't leave it up to memory, and don't rely on any one staff to be the source of all knowledge of SNAP E&T. Turnover happens, and continuity for this program is really key for growing over time. I think we've seen this happen a lot at various levels of SNAP E&T implementation, from the state agencies down to providers. If you do have turnover and that knowledge and sort of the understanding of why things happen and what's happening is lost, it can really set you back in your growth as a program. So be sure to, just put everything in writing, make sure that there's that documentation to offer continuity over time. Next slide, please. So, we've offered you, and this comes from one of our partners in another project who has sites across the country. They have a highly organized sort of plan for training staff. So we've kind of offered this as an example of what you might look to do over time as you're building your capacity, and maybe as you're scaling up to train staff for SNAP E&T. So this is just sort of a sample for you. You may not have to be this organized in what you're doing as you get started. It might not involve that many folks, and it might not be that complex, but think about where you might want to be sort of planning ahead and making sure that people are sort of skilled up as you get going. So this is just here as an example for what you could sort of work towards. Next slide, please. So, another kind of helpful exercise for you to do is to sort of map what all of the different, elements that we've talked about today, kind of putting just down in writing and doing an exercise of how your program's administrative processes kind of map onto Snap E&T can be a really helpful exercise. Might be something that you consider doing with individualized TA, actually, as you move forward in this cohort. Bob and I and Steve and Jose can kind of help you think through what your processes might look like and map those onto Snap E&T. Might be a really helpful exercise. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to our my neighbor. I live very close to Shoreline in Washington. So we have here today, our second guest speaker is Michael Boehm from Shoreline Community College in Washington State. And he'll be able to offer you, I think, some perspective from a college that has a really robust Snap E&T program in Washington, and sort of some examples of what capacity looks like for a college that's kind of a little bit further down the road in building capacity. So Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And hello, everyone. My name is Michael Boehm. I work at Shoreline Community College. I'm a program specialist here and manage the BFET program. BFET is Basic Food Employment and Training here in Washington. So I've been here with the college for about 14 years, and most of that time I've been connected through the workforce education, which is where we house our BFET program. And we started the BFET as a pilot back around 2007, and I took over around 2008. So we've been here for a while. Needless to say, a lot has changed since we originally started this. We went from basically a deficit program to a program now where we actually have a significant amount of reimbursement funds that we house so that we can build the program and do special things like give gas cards and bus passes and all the stuff that supports students to complete their program and transition to employment. So we have approximately on a regular year, which I don't even know what a regular year looks like anymore, honestly. But on a regular year, we usually have between 85 and say 150 students in our program per quarter. I'd heard the comment about an intermediary, and we do definitely work with the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges. They oversee our grant. We work with them on our quarterly meetings to learn all the changes, which is, I'd heard mention how important that was, and it really is important. There's so many changes that having a group that can get together and talk about those changes and interpret those changes is extremely helpful. So I also heard indirect come up several times. So just for your information, we have an indirect rate of 35% of our salaries. It's a significant way to give back to the campus for keeping the lights on and doing groundskeeping. And right now we have a total expenditures in our grant of around plus or minus 900,000. And as I will point out later, it's tricky. The BFET program is very tricky. It's a very complicated program in that it's difficult to know whether you're talking about 100% funds or 50% funds. So our 100% of our expenditures is right around 900,000. That means our grant's right around 450,000. So I thought I would tell you just quickly about what it looks like on our campus, so you get an idea of kind of the day-to-day, and then also go into the structure and how we operate here. We've been doing this for a while. There's always room for improvement, but I feel like we have a pretty decent program at this point. So I picture BFET is like a second financial aid office for people that are working with our Department of Social and Health Services and their SNAP program. We determine eligibility after they're receiving SNAP benefits. We will then also have our own criteria for who we serve. And we serve, for instance, students that are in half-time enrolled, which is 6 credits here at our college or state. We serve Washington State residents. That's our local policy. So we do some of those criteria and triage folks to make sure that they're eligible. And once we do that and they're eligible, we actually pay for tuition and fees. We pay for books and supplies. We can help with transportation. Right now, we're doing $100 in gas cards, for instance, or we do what's called a regional bus pass. So that's a huge benefit to our students. It's a big support to our students, and it helps our students get through. It also allows them to be eligible for state-assisted childcare, so subsidized childcare when they're part of our BFEP program. So we have students in our program for a lot of reasons. Some of them don't need any money. They just need help with childcare so they can go to school. Some don't need help with childcare, needless to say. We also provide case management and do some guiding, advising, and also offboarding into careers. So those are kind of some of the services that are part of our BFEP program. As far as our college goes, we're located under the Office of Instruction, and we're specifically tied with our STEM department. There's an asterisk here, and I won't get into that, but essentially our workforce education department serves professional technical students exclusively. Again, an asterisk, because BFET isn't exactly that way. And so we are housed in the STEM division, and we're within our own workforce education department. So we house all of our state and federal grants in that one department. And that's really important because BFET is a leverage program. If you don't have leverage, there is no program. And so having the programs together that fund similar students and have some state monies attached is absolutely the key to success. I was asked to talk about who at the college works with our program, our students here, I guess our program. And we have, once our grant is written, we receive our budget. And so our budget office obviously is intimately involved with setting up our budgets and making sure everything works. Workforce education, which is what I'm housed under, does all the groundwork. So they all do all the student work and they do the admin work. And there's 2 of us right now that do that work. Once we determine eligibility, we send that list of students who we want to fund to our financial aid office. And that's a really important thing. Financial aid is intimately involved with this, and our financial aid person is somewhat dedicated to our workforce education and our BFEP program. And so they make awards in our systems, and then we also need to be able to track those awards. And so we work with our institutional assessment team, and they build server reports for us and ways for us to be able to capture that so that we can invoice that. Our program is broken up into 2 of us. And so there's the student work piece, and then of course there's the admin piece. So on the student work side, one of us works and completes intakes, identifies barriers, and obviously helps with resource identification. They are the primary communicator with our financial aid office and our bookstore, so that we make sure our students get books and their tuition and all the other associated funds paid for. They do the case management. So all the administrative tasks of case noting and documentation, that's also on their plate. And piece of that is what's called the individual employment plan. And that's where the student identifies what their plan is towards employment. And then our goals are written around that. That person who does the student side also helps determines their BFET eligibility on a local level. The administrative side, which is what I primarily do, is the grant rating piece. I also complete the invoicing, which is a whole conversation in itself. Any of the policy development, there are a lot of policies that change in BFET, and over the years, it's a very different beast than it was when we started in 2007. So keeping up with policies, making sure that our policies are in line with our new grant guidelines, a lot of troubleshooting and difficult situations. That's a very, very important part of my role here too. And then of course, I had heard mention from Susan about the basically having documenting, and that at our state is an extremely important piece. Having both a student and an admin handbook really saves your bacon for those monitoring visits, because they can read about your program and know your program without having to grill you on the spot and try to learn about it. It's been very helpful, and we have a really good handbook because of that. So the things that I don't know I've heard as much, but with workforce education and specifically BFET, leveraging those funds is, again, it is the program. So BFET is a match or leverage program. I've heard match quite a bit, and you know, some of the folks at the state board would immediately correct you and say leverage. So we leverage with our other state funding programs. We have what's called a worker retraining program, and those are students who, you know, are getting unemployment benefits, or they've exhausted their unemployment benefits, or their business has been affected by an emergency, or some of those things. And those state funded, we have a lot of co-enrolled students with that program. We have what's called a opportunity grant program, which is Washington State only, and is the same income criteria, 200% of the federal poverty level, and the same guidelines essentially, with just some more limitations around what programs they can be in. And that program we share a lot of students with, and that again, I can't be understated how important the leverage piece of it is. If you have anything from this, take away, leveraging funds is the key. We also have some state grants. We have what's called the Washington College Grant. And what happens is essentially our students that are BFET students, they've met our BFET criteria, are paid for by these other grants. And we get to capture 50% of that reimbursement. And so what that does is that builds us a very nice pot of money that we can then reutilize to grow the program, whether it's for salaries, whether it's for developing a BFET work group. I've put on some focus groups to find out what students really need. There's the gas card. There's a numerous ways that we use those reutilized funds. In fact, we use it for our adult basic education and our ESL students because they don't have any other sources of finance at our school. So we pay for those through our reutilized funds. So that's it's without being too crass, it really is a great way to make money and have a way to both support your BFET program and grow it. There's some challenges with the program, needless to say, and some tricky stuff. One of those for a lot of programs, and I've talked to a lot of schools, I've talked to a lot of other schools in other states, quite a few actually, and finding those match sources can be a trick. We're very lucky here. We got a commitment from the college, which I also heard earlier about getting the commitment from your executive team. We got a commitment from them to be able to use what's called 3.5% institutional funds, which is essentially 3.5% of the school budget, and we can use that money to support students who have a need. And we wrote up a proposal to use about $150,000 to $200,000 a year in that. And so when we're talking about building our reutilized fund or reimbursed funds, that's, think about that, right? So potentially each year we have $150,000 plus going into our account. Add in the Washington College Grant, which we frequently will have $20,000 to $40,000 a month of leverage. Those aren't monies that came out of a BFET budget per se, but they're monies that we use as match and leverage, and we get to put those funds into our reimbursed funds. And I'm using the word reimbursed and utilized interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable, but it's the same money. So we spend $70,000 in a month, and we're going to get $35,000 back, and those are our reimbursed funds. Once we decide to use those funds, then they become reutilized funds, and the only criteria for that is that they are for eligible BFET expenses. So you can be creative and you can do some things. You can create your own classes if you wanted to. You could, there's a lot of the world is your oyster. Understanding the reimbursement model is also a challenge, even after all these years where I've been somewhat at least involved in VBED. It's still a challenge, right? Are we talking about 100% money? Are we talking about 50% money? We're spending 100%. Well, where do we get the other 50% back, right? So spending into a deficit is how we originally started our program because of the challenges of understanding the reimbursement model. But I think we've got it figured out now. I think we're doing okay. And then the last challenge I'll just bring up is really tracking those expenditures, and having having all expenses come out of one budget would be the dream. It doesn't work like that, but it would be the dream. And that's what kind of our expectation is here in Washington. So we've set that up as best we can. But again, tracking those expenditures because they are in multiple budgets can be a little bit tricky. So that's why earlier on I said that our institutional assessment program was really involved with helping us be able to track that. So that's our program, and we've been doing it for a while. We've done some things great. We've done some things that not so great, and I think we're to the point where we have a program that we're very proud of. There are many great programs, and I think ours is one of them as well. Yeah, it's a fantastic program. It really supports. So I'd also heard earlier that we didn't just want to support the students who are there, and we really bring students on campus because of the program. We actively market the BFET program and all workforce programs off campus. We actively promote them on campus. We use it as a retention tool. There's a lot of different ways to use this, but use your imagination, and I think you could actually increase your FTE on your campus if you play your cards right.
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate you offering your perspective. And, we sort of offered two examples of programs like Shoreline has been around for many years. Washington has a very robust SNAP E&T program. So, understanding kind of the context of these different examples is important, and figuring out sort of where your college is going to kind of sit in the context of what's possible, I think is helpful to think about, but all, just to think about the potential can be as you grow and as you're getting started. We really appreciate that. Michael, I don't know if we'll talk about this today. Maybe some folks might have questions about this, but one thing that I think is really clear is in order to grow, in order to do this program, you have to have eligible students. And so how you're working with students who may or may not be already receiving SNAP benefits could be a really key piece of the work that colleges do. So, we might talk about that more. We may reach out to you in the future to talk about that. But I do want to open it up to others for any questions that they might have for Michael, or just for the whole presentation. We don't have any more slides to share. So we do have some time for questions.
And I did put my contact information in the chat there if anyone had any specific questions for me or how we do things.
Thank you, Michael.
Susan, this is Steve. There was a question in the chat earlier about which supportive services does Jefferson provide to its participants?
I know that Joanne had to hop off, but if anybody else.
I think Richard
here,
is still on, Susan.
Oh, great. Yeah, Richard, can you speak to that?
I'm so sorry. I just hopped back on because we actually had a student. What was the question?
What support services do you provide at Jefferson
Support
for
services.
ENT students, SNAP ENT?
Yeah, so Well, several support services. So Gina works closely with the hub. She actually supervises the hub. So SNAP ENT clients that come in when we do a barriers form and assess what non-academic barriers the student might have. We connect the students to the hub if they have any, I'm sorry, it's our food pantry on campus that has a licensed social worker. So they can actually be tied to places in the community if they need help with the light bill, if they have food insecurities, housing issues, a lot of stuff like that. We also have laptop loaners here, of course, the SNAP ENT laptop loaner program, but we also have one here at the college. We have student emergency funds that we tie students to and help support their applications into those. So we actually have two different student emergency funds right now that students can tap into. So Gina and I kind of tie the students to all those services once we see that there's a need for, or what there's a need for. And then we have Spalding here that does mental behavioral services here on campus for free. So we have a huge amount of services, supportive services that Gina and I tie the students on into based on their need. We also have a membership. Sorry, one other thing, we have a membership with the zoo. Partnership with the zoo, the Louisville Zoo, where right now anybody receiving SNAP benefits can get a family pass. So a great opportunity to spend some, family time if they have for the zoo for a year.
Thanks, Richard. Any other questions? Sorry about going over time.
Well, we do want to thank everyone again for joining us today. And yes,
Sorry, Steve, there's one more question that came on the
oh,
chat.
sorry. Okay.
What reimbursements are you invoicing for? If you could speak to that, Richard or Michael, either or, both.
Yes, I don't think that's something I wouldn't be able to speak on. That was more of a Joanna. This with our grants and contracts. It was at the beginning of the call that kind of spoke for Jefferson. So unfortunately, that's something I wouldn't be able to speak on because I don't see that part of it.
So at Shoreline Community College, the reimbursements we would do would be tuition fees, books, and the supplies that are necessary and reasonable to be successful in their classes. Our bus pass or our gas cards are specifically what we're able to invoice for. There's in the handbook, there's about 70 other items that are possible, and it really depends on the school situation, what they can support. Some schools actually pay rent for students. We don't do that. We don't have a process or a system for setting that up. But there's a lot of things that can be reimbursed, but it really depends on your utilized funds and your ability. Our college will not create a check that goes out. So being able to pay some of those things like rent and repair bills for cars and all those things are just, they don't happen at our school. So we do the maximum we can with that goes through our invoicing, or excuse me, our budgeting system.
And Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that childcare in Washington State is paid for through the state. In other words, it doesn't come through SNAP ENT. It's something that ENT eligible students are eligible for based on their status as SNAP ENT, and is paid for with TANF funds.
I don't know if it's paid for TANF funds specifically, but yes. So when you're eligible for the BFET program here in Washington State, you're eligible for the number of hours that you're participating in school plus travel time. And that's paid for now by the Division of Youth and Family Services, or division of something.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, Shauna, you have a question?
Well, more of a comment, actually. In Kentucky, our state several years back launched what we call a Work Ready scholarship that's available to any student coming into our community and technical colleges that with a technical program that's identified by our state WIOA agency as being a high demand sector. When we pursued with our state agency and them in turn reaching out to FNS, the possibility, and those are 100% state funds that fuel that scholarship, but we were advised that we could not offer that as match because it was not targeting specifically SNAP clients. And so we've basically been advised that, you know, if the college is not able or willing to commit a funding stream or a support specifically to SNAP students, that is not considered matchable in the E&T process. Just a lesson we learned the hard way. We were so excited about the possibility of using our Work Ready state scholarship as match, but that did not work out.
Thanks, Shauna.
All right, well, I think we need to go ahead and wrap it up. I do appreciate everyone's patience and hanging in there with us. And sorry for running over a bit, but I think this information is well worth it. So thank you again for your time. Feel free to reach out to myself or Jose. We're here to help. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
And if I can make one final plug, just again, a reminder, we're trying to schedule our May meetings with the 6 states. So if I've emailed you to inquire about dates, please get back to me as soon as possible. Otherwise, our calendars start filling up. Particularly Bob's and Susan's. We want to make sure they're in the room because they're the experts. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. I'll close it out now.
All right, thanks. See you later.
See ya.